Solar doesn't fail on apartment buildings because of physics. You can install solar, the equipment exists, the tariffs even exist. There's even a buyer, the renter, everything's there. What's not there is the last mile. It fails because of the accounting.
Today's entrepreneur is specifically trying to address a problem that, if you've been in the industry for any period of time, you've noticed. Why are apartments, rooftops on multifamily buildings still virtually naked while single-family homes essentially print savings with rooftop solar? Today's guest saw and decided to build software around addressing the math that finally makes this possible for renters and owners. Dover Janis is the co-founder of Ivy Energy. And if you haven't heard of Ivy yet, you are going to love what Dover and his team are building. And if you have heard of Ivy, then I know you're excited to get into the inner workings and really better understand exactly the underlying problem that we define as the split incentive. We have that and more for you on today's episode of SunCast, so stick around. And if you do love what you hear, there's more than 850 episodes just like this. Founders on the front lines of the clean energy transition, helping you stay ahead of the curve and equipping you to lead this transition. Thank you for tuning in. Now let's get ready to tune up your skills, Solar Warrior, with another powerful episode here on SunCast. Dover, at last, it is good to finally have you on the show, man.
We made it. Happy to be here. Longtime listener. Excited to dive in today.
Indeed, man. I've grown to admire you as a founder. I think I've probably mentioned here, am a very small seed investor into the Ivy Energy journey, and have just been watching as you not only matured the business, but matured as a leader. And it's been a long time coming to be able to share with the world. You guys are making an ambitious goal to effectively be the software, the backbone that allows owners of multifamily businesses to monetize those assets with solar. It's something that's been a long fabled problem. If you touch multi-tenant real estate at all, then this conversation could really rewrite how you think about your assets and your pipeline. And so I'm glad to have you, Dover, to help share sort of the virtual grid and the virtual gold that we can unlock with that product. To kick it off, I'd love it if you could just give me a sense of that epiphany moment where you realized that there were all these naked rooftops that could benefit from the product that we know can unlock value in every building, solar.
That moment really was a buildup. My entire professional career, there was pieces that I learned along the way that made that moment real to me. But to give everybody a glimpse and give you a glimpse of what that moment looked like, I was specifically in a residential neighborhood. I was not at Ivy at the time. This was pre-Ivy. I was working on another startup related to circuit level energy monitoring. And there was this neighborhood in California, and every single rooftop had solar on it. Mm-hmm. And there was like this, it was really like the neglected child or the neglected building on the street.
Right.
With a tucked back driveway. Like, it didn't even get the street side real estate. It was tucked back. And I think that is true in how the solar industry has looked at these types of buildings, just from the design of this neighborhood. And this 40, 50 unit apartment building, as a solar nerd, I'm looking at this perfect comp shingle roof. You could put a really efficient rectangular glass array, probably 150 kilowatts or so, perfectly on this rooftop. And in my mind, it was just not okay that every building on the street had solar, and these homeowners were benefiting from the benefits that we all know. But all these renters in this building that were kind of neglected, they had a perfect rooftop and no solar on that building. And so, there's a lot more to that story and leading up to that point in time. But that was the moment personally where I said, I don't care if I need to work for free, if I need to invest every dime I have into fixing that problem. I was personally committed to figuring it out. And here we are, 7 years later from that point in time. We've done a lot. We'll talk more about that, but that was the moment in time for me where I became committed to the problem.
Dover, one of the things that I've learned that is core to not just the problem you've expressed of fundamentally why that building among this entire neighborhood didn't have solar, but why it's been so difficult to convert this particular niche, I'll call it, but it's a rather large niche of real estate, is this concept around the split incentive. So imagine that I'm the CFO of a real estate investment trust or of a large family holding even of properties who has, heretofore foregone the opportunity to go solar. Explain the split incentive to me. And I actually want you to underscore why apartment owners like myself have not gone solar so far.
Solar doesn't fail on apartment buildings because of physics. You can install solar, the equipment exists, the tariffs even exist. There's even a buyer, the renter, everything's there. What's not there is the last mile. It fails because of the accounting. So Nico, the split incentive you reference is the reason why these rooftops don't have solar. If I am the CFO at a large real estate company, why am I going to spend $5 million, even though a tariff exists for me to provide bill savings to my tenants? Why am I going to invest this CapEx dollar amount into my real estate asset for my tenants to save money?
Right.
California, other states have created these tariffs where if I'm a CFO, I can do that. But the split incentive is you need to be able to invest a dollar and make something back. And so we're operationalizing that process of making a return. So we're the easy button for that CFO to write that check and then be able to reconcile and settle an amount back to their P&L while the tenant's also winning in the process.
Dover, I'm going to be a little bit out of my depth, but I'm trying to understand the mechanics of the sort of the bill. Like I know that for these multifamily properties, the valuation and sort of the value that is being tracked is off like multiples of OPEX. So they want to reduce OPEX, but is there some disconnect there in how making this capital expenditure doesn't drop to the bottom line for them from an operating expense perspective?
Traditionally solar, you're dealing with a stakeholder that has an expense and they're making an investment to reduce that cost. As a real estate company who has tenants and leases space as their core business competency, that electricity expense is not theirs.
That's right, it's passed through.
It is their tenants, right? And it's out of sight, out of mind. So as a real estate owner, you have hundreds of ways to reduce your cost.
Yeah.
Literally hundreds. So you're competing with a lot of different things. Solar for your common area could be one of those. What's different about this is there's very few ways to actually increase top line revenue in a real estate asset. The traditional way is to increase the rent. And in a housing constrained environment, where rents are always already extremely high. I live in San Diego and it's one of the most expensive places to live. It wasn't that way 7 years ago when we started the business. But this is one of a few ways that you can actually, reduce the bill savings for the tenant as a real estate owner, increase revenue by taking a portion of that benefit and then passing through a portion to the tenant who's leasing your space. So that's fundamentally, why this is attractive to real estate companies is it's actually a rev gen. It's a revenue boost to their asset, and there's very few ways to do that.
Explain to me then the last mile, this gap that Ivy is choosing to own from your perspective as a professional solar expert. When you started really digging in to understanding this split incentive problem and how to address the accounting portion of it, what was missing and what had to exist in order for you to deliver on this promise?
The first idea was, let's talk to a real estate company and let's do everything for them. We did our homework on the policy. There was certain policies that had to exist, such as virtual net metering, basically a way to get that financial value from a system that maybe is not behind the meter of each tenant, but is tied in at the switchgear or the transformer. They call it a line side tap. Based on in a lot of configurations, there had to be a way to basically account for that power and get that back to the residents' bills, and then settle the difference between the two parties,
right?
The real estate owner and the tenant that's leasing that space. So, we said, hey, these policies are fairly new. To answer your question, those had to exist. And that was a public, mandate where smart politicians or regulators said, hey, we need renters to have access to clean energy. So here's these tariffs. Good luck. And what happened, we thought at first, maybe the solar installers are just lazy and they don't want to go handle the sales process with the large real estate company because it's long and cumbersome and it's new, and we're just going to stick to our business model of C&I rooftops or resi. So we first thought, let's just be the solar company. Let's develop the project. That was kind of idea number one. And then we quickly realized there's so much complication in just managing the data, the accounting, the workflow integrations, the automation to make this as simple as possible for the core customer that's actually making a decision to put solar on their rooftop, which is the real estate owner, and getting the tenant to benefit in that process. And so that's when we pivoted and we said, we need to be the platform. We need to enable the market, enable the experts that know how to, manage buying power and basically build these assets. We just need to be that last mile.
Essentially, if every installer is running into this, then every installer is going to want to quit because this is too hard compared with the alternative.
Exactly. And so that's where we said, look, if we can just own the last mile of the problem and solve that, then we're going to, there's an army of people out there and smart installers that can go fulfill all these infrastructure.
This is the
projects.
Classic picks and shovels versus minor business conundrum, right? It's like what tools are missing for someone who wants to be in this position of actually installing these assets, who wants to do it, but they can't? Like, how do we actually give them the tools to harvest the goldenness in them hills right there? I get
exactly.
it. So where do you start then? As you started to unpack that problem, you weren't a software engineer by training. I asked you, I remember the first time I sat in your office, I thought, like, where do you even begin with this problem if you are coming from a sort of like almost, I'm going to call you like a tradesman, but you had been like physically learning how to put all this stuff together and going at it from the field. So you're backing out of the field now thinking, how do I actually develop tools, namely software? Take me there.
Look, there's a lot of great software engineers in the world. I'm a generalist in a lot of things. So self-taught in a lot of the skills that I use day to day. What I think was really important for the formation of the product and the company that Ivy is today was understanding the policy and getting the design of the product right. We had to fast forward. Okay, we start here. Billing seems really simple, but when you break down the timelines, the dates, the overlapping events, the administrative processes that the utility require, then the expectations of both users, I think that's where the most important skill I brought and I guess attribute early on was taking the policy, taking the tariff designs, and then translating that into software requirements that effectively could solve this problem. And so was able to partner up with really talented software engineers as we built the first version of the product, learned a lot. Then the second version of the product, we're actually going into kind of the third iteration, which is a really adaptive and we call it atomic structure, where it basically meets regulatory conditions across 50 states. So unfortunately, California and Colorado are not the same. How you tie in a solar system on this type of building versus that building, you might need a completely different product to actually solve this last mile problem. And so I think that's where my generalist skill sets and the ability to be more of an expert on the energy policy and understand these tariffs has really helped us iterate on the software and bring a solution to market that actually solves the problem.
Dover, I'm curious, when you built as you built out the original team, there's usually inflection points where you start to think, you have that sort of founder's doubt, like, am I the right person for this? Are we the right team for this? Have I raised enough money? What was the first, like the earliest hurdle you can remember that kind of gave you that moment of reflection, like, is this what I really want to be doing? And then you doubled down. What happened there?
I think what really gave me power every morning to fight this battle was, one, nobody else was doing it. And one trait that I've always carried about, for myself is I'll do the things other people won't do. And I'll take the shot that other people aren't shooting. And so I really felt it was my calling to wake up in the morning and take these extremely complex no's we were getting from customers or problems we didn't have an answer to, and put my work boots on and figure out how to fix that problem. And so, sure, is there a smarter software engineer to build maybe what we built in version 1? Probably, but I think that we were the only company taking the policy, the customer problem, and actually addressing it head on in a way that was truly going to enable the market and have a vision behind that effort. Where other people, they had the idea, but they didn't want to go through that learning curve or that, honestly, just really difficult barrier to break through. And so we broke through the barrier. And I think that is directly a outcome of the perseverance that our early, founding team had. And, how we've leveled up, as we've gotten funding and learned the hard way, on multiple areas. And we are where we are today. And we have the right, some of the smartest people in policy, on the software engineering side. We've just been able to attract amazing talent, over the last 7 years. So I think we are in a really great place. We have the right people, but I think early on it was all about perseverance and just being obsessed with solving a specific problem that I don't think anybody else at that time could have done.
Dover, in an effort to effectively become an operating system for these property managers, something occurs to me that back 15 years ago when I was starting my own solar company, approaching a lot of realtors or real estate owners, I constantly got pushback on, which is like in certain markets in Northern California where I was, there was this concern or fear that the IOUs or the existing utilities would see you as a competitor. You'd effectively become an energy operator or an energy provider. Is it fair to say that Ivy does in fact turn these property owners into energy providers? And how do you square that with the policy or regulatory risk or hurdles that they would encounter in that moment?
We talk about how this had never been done before. I think that question is specifically why a lot of people didn't want to pivot into this model or face the opposition that could come with the business model and the disruptive outcome. Because essentially we are taking, there's 44 million renting households in the United States. About 60-70% of those can have on-site energy. And these landlords do have an opportunity to be a de facto or new-aged renewable energy provider. They're not a utility company by definition, just to make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
They are following under independent power provider laws, and it varies state by state. It is a pretty complex regulatory environment, and there's a lot of legacy law that was designed around the past and not the state in which technology can play a role in these buildings today.
Right.
However, I think just going back to the question, there's been a lot of regulatory opposition throughout our journey. And I think that any other team, look, there's other people trying to address this problem in different ways now, but I think that's only possible because we have proven that what we're doing is sound and it makes sense. And it actually does align with policy initiatives. And there are laws that back the business model. And we've been able to prove that. I mean, I've been on, I've done testimony and public workshops with utilities in the room and regulators talking about the win-win-win here and why certain regulations don't make sense and why they need to change if there's a proceeding. I can name about 5 specific points as a CEO and a founder where our business was basically on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
Ready to fall off of it if things went one way or the other. And I think that we've gotten to the other side of that. And I think it's just a testament to just the willpower and really being anchored by a win-win model that does benefit everybody. It's on a sound foundation.
Yeah. I know that most of the systems that you guys deploy are owned directly by the real estate investors, not third-party owners, which in the world of solar, quite a large percentage, well over half, I think, are third-party owned systems in some way or other. Why do you suppose, or what have you learned about the sophistication of this type of owner that prefers to hold the asset? And I'm curious if you think we'll see less third-party ownership in this segment over time.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's definitely a role for managing an asset, off balance sheet, roof lease type of model.
Mm-hmm.
And we do see that. And we work with some of those providers. I think we're going to see more and more of those providers. However, I don't think it will be majority of the market. Most real estate owners have access to capital. And so if they understand how to invest CapEx or use their access to capital to invest $1 and make $1, it's all about an IRR in terms of how they look at that investment, which is a little bit different than a homeowner, a little bit different than a business that has maybe cash flow constraints and owns their own real estate. And it's different than community solar because that's all done by a third-party developer. So there's definitely a role for third-party owners in the market, but I think it'll be a smaller segment than I think the owner-operated systems that we see from large real estate companies with access to capital.
Dover, I, along with many others, sort of looked at this space when I was out developing projects, looking for customers as effectively what we refer to in the industry as commercial industrial. One of my first big project proposals was for a huge apartment building complex in Salinas, California, that up to then, the largest project I'd done is 30 kilowatts, bunch of residential projects. I just sort of looked at this as like one big residential project. It wasn't clear to me why it didn't work. You've spent a lot of times working with developers, both those who specialize in multi-use and family, low income, as well as helping other installers in the C&I space to wrap their head around this. Help us distinguish between the various verticals and how this is sort of similar and or different from what installers might be used to in their business model.
Yeah, so I think the starting point here is who's paying the bill and where's the money coming from? And then we can get into what makes a project different from another project physically and how the metering and the tariffs interplay into that. So, but at a very, very simple level, most of the solar you see on apartment buildings is grant funded, meaning there's subsidy that is basically paying for the rooftop solar system. So therefore, there's no need for a split incentive framework because the dollars came from the government or from taxpayers or ratepayers. The SOMA program in California is a good example of this. There's no billing, there's no cost recovery. It's just, hey, this goes on the roof. It's an amenity. The owner goes through the brain damage of agreeing to that installation just because it's kind of an amenity for the low-income folks that live in that community. That's always going to have a ceiling on it in terms of growth. So we're more on the other side where when you need to invest $1 and split up the benefits of that infrastructure between two parties, we're going to operationalize that agreement and be kind of the medium in that exchange process. So that's really step one. And so there's a lot of developers that have just kind of ridden the public subsidy portion of the market. And, there's some groups that have done really well. And I think there's a big need for that. I'm not saying that model is bad. I actually think it's good. And I think that proportionally, homeowners have benefited so much from solar that I think there's justification for a portion of that level of subsidy. So from there, you take kind of the projects that need capital, and you have a couple different frameworks. There's really three ways to slice up the building types. There's a building with 1 meter on it with the utility, and this is the easiest scenario where you have one utility meter. You might have 100, 200 units that are privately sub-metered. So the solar system's just tied in at that one node with the grid. You have one reconciliation with the utility, and then you basically behind that point have to make sure there's an equitable process to pass along the benefits that are being accrued at that 1 meter and make sure people are paying their fair share of the cost and then receiving their fair share of the benefits. That's probably the smallest portion of the market because most buildings are utility metered, where a tenant actually has a utility account and a meter with the regional utility company. And so that kind of leads us to the next building type where you basically need a tariff, like a virtual net metering program, or sometimes it's looks similar to a community solar tariff, where you're basically installing a rooftop or carport-based solar system, and you don't have 1 meter to tie it into. You have to basically tie it in at the switchgear or do a line side tap kind of behind the transformer. And then you need a tariff to basically apply those credits to those individual tenant utility meters. And so that's what makes this segment of the market very different than traditional resi or C&I, because typically if you're a solar developer, you're taking a bill and you're doing analysis 12 months backwards, and you're saying, I'm going to stick a solar system, on the load panel, the main panel, behind the meter. We're going to basically reduce the meter reading with the utility company, and we're going to get benefit for that avoided, retail energy. And in front of the meter example I just mentioned, the same physical or like scientific, like Kirchhoff's law is being used in terms of the power flow. Like, even though we're in front of the meters, that power is following the path of least resistance, and it is going back to those units. It's just not ticking that meter down like a traditional behind the meter system would. So in our industry, when we say things like behind the meter, like what that definition means in our industry is we're reducing the load. Right. We're reducing the count of the meter, as it accounts for electrons,
right,
and kilowatt hours. But in multifamily, that's why this is so different than single family from a policy and regulatory standpoint, is because the same thing's happening. It's just not being accounted for the same way. So this is, I think, the tricky scenario that developers and solar installers get into when they start to use phrases like behind the meter, because it actually doesn't. It doesn't mean what we think it does in multifamily.
That's fascinating. One thing that's occurring to me as I'm thinking about this is, sounds like you're essentially able to convert these real estate owners into community solar owners with a built-in subscriber base. Is that fair to say?
There's more to it, but that's the very simple way to describe the model.
Are you competing in some way then with the aggregators who already serve the community solar industry or model? The
functionality is similar. There's a few differences. For instance, when you aggregate community solar demand, a subscriber base, you are leveraging, transmission and distribution grid.
Yeah.
And the credit value is relatively linear and straightforward in terms of how you apply those credits. When you look at a building and you look at, let's say a building is just one big load, right? Maybe you have 200 different behavior points of decision-making in terms of how you use power. That's really the fundamental difference in our model, is there is an opportunity around time of use, proportional kind of usage of the solar that does matter when you include the grid as a stakeholder in that win-win-win-win. And so that's really the fundamental difference. From a functionality standpoint, it's the same outcome. It's splitting up the credit, but there's this more dynamic nature to how you apply those credits, how you allocate them, and there's more moving parts than in a traditional community solar subscriber base.
I want to circle back to the moving parts, because a lot of this is, as I mentioned, regulated. Yeah, there are a lot of decisions, closed door, sort of behind the scenes stuff that you're privy to, stuff that's like public policy. But to move a business like this forward, you have to be very hands-on with how policy is being shaped in the markets, primarily California, where you operate and have headquarters, but across the nation. Can you talk about the effort at it as a startup to try and have some leverage over the policies that themselves will define or in some cases kill the market that you're trying to serve?
So there's many policies. I think every year, there's a little bit of a trauma associated to AB, whatever the numbers are, right? Because there's this one, and it's a painful subject, and there's two I'm going to talk about. And also, before I go into policy, I have to shout out Ali Detrio,
Yeah,
who's been our
Ali.
policy consultant. She's been a rock star. Ivy's done a lot, but she's really, been a key partner in all of our policy efforts. And then Elena Steele, our chief policy and legal officer. Just great women, really trailblazing the regulatory side of what we do. But there's two policies that I'll talk about. The first, I think, is the most common policy that probably everybody's going to understand, which is the transition from net metering 2.0 to net metering 3.0. And as this was happening, there was this parallel proceeding related to virtual net metering.
Mm-hmm.
That it was one proceeding, but we helped basically carve out the virtual net metering side of NEM 2 to NEM 3 in California.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, I think, the moment in time where Ivy created a new muscle around being involved in policy. And it really came out of, survival. We, because homeowners in the transition from NEM 2 and NEM 3 in the first proposed decision that came out, it basically said, hey, homeowner, put solar on your rooftop in a NEM 3 environment and optimize your load, and you're going to get this value for the kilowatt hour that goes to the grid, and you're going to get this value, closer to retail time of use for the kilowatt hour that you consume. But what got thrown under the rug related to renters and apartment buildings in that document was crazy. It basically was going to treat that in front of the meter, switchgear interconnection for VNEM as a generator asset only, and basically make a claim that asset was not impacting the load in the building,
right,
which is false and incorrect. And it was like the utilities were like, nobody's paying attention to this. We're just going to put it in there. And our lawyers, were really clever, and we're just going to basically shut down virtual net metering and pay 5 cents a kilowatt hour as a feed-in tariff. And I think we were the first ones, and Ivy can't take all the credit. CalSA and a lot of other companies, I think, followed us into this. But I think everybody was so focused on the California market and the behind-the-meter systems and really debating the cost shift that nobody really paid attention to this virtual net metering decision that was being put in there. And so what we did is that's when we really created this new muscle, this training within the company. Like, how are we going to go position to regulators? We've never done this before. How are we going to basically state that scientifically this isn't correct? And it's basically treating renters as they're basically getting the worst end of the deal here, and they've already been left behind in the solar clean energy transition. This is wrong. And so we basically put the documents together and went through the process, became a party in the proceeding as Ivy Energy, and we started to write. We started to do the thing. Go to Sacramento and talk to regulators and have ex parte meetings. And it was fascinating because our basis in all of our documentation was scientific. It was this electron, even though it's in front of a meter, is going back to the building. So in layman's terms, what the proposed decision was saying was, hey, real estate owner, invest in solar, or we're going to make you put solar on in your new construction buildings through Title 24, which requires solar in new construction.
Right.
And then the power company is going to basically take credit for that electron because it's in front of the meter. And then they're going to sell that electron that never left the building back to that individual tenant meter at 30 cents and pay you 5. So it was a really simple argument. It took way too much time and money, but we ended up getting, one, from an equity standpoint, and two, from a just scientific, laws of physics standpoint. We really created a basis and a narrative that was able to carve out renters, basically buy time, put the virtual net metering proceeding into its own process in Sacramento with the CPUC, and really, let's move on from NEM 2 to NEM 3 for behind the meter systems. And then let's go talk about multifamily separately
Right.
and really carve out a dedicated working group and get the right people in the room. And that was a big first win. And really, I think gave us a lot of encouragement that we were doing the right thing.
Did you have someone, maybe Allie or others, who were recommending the steps? Like, hey, the real thing is like we got to get it pulled out of the legislation first, like because it's not an inherent like intuitive decision or step to take.
There was a strategic decision to basically carve out this conversation and get basically buy time. So the facts, the data could be studied.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we actually recommended that there was a full, not just for solar, but in terms of rate making in general, an apartment dwelling is a much smaller, footprint than a home, but is essentially on the same rate plan as a single family home. So there's this whole like, we're kind of opening up a much bigger effort in terms of studying rate making in general, but it ended up just buying time, and that was the decision, was to carve this out and make a decision that was specific to renters.
So at the end of the day, I'm curious. You've been pretty vocal about the kinds of policies that you want to see. If you could wave a magic wand and mandate one thing, having gone through all these policy machinations, what would it look like, and how does that lever unlock a massive market for the industry?
When you look at a building, it is one load profile. You might have, like we spoke about, you might have multiple decision makers in terms of how you use energy, but it is one node on the grid.
Yeah.
This policy and this regulatory setup does exist in multiple states, but it doesn't everywhere, and so that's why I'm bringing it up. It would be ideal and correct if we actually metered that building that way, where that building was one meter with the utility, and the utility did its job of managing transmission, distribution, and imported supply of energy. If it is a regulated market,
right?
And you let the real estate owner use technology and the opportunities in energy management and price incentives to balance the energy that we have all the technology for, to accomplish amazing outcomes. And it's crazy that in some states you cannot master meter a building. And this is driven from laws in the 70s around this fear of not conserving energy, where it's just not even a real issue anymore because of the technology we have today. And so that's one of our biggest policy efforts right now, is actually making that a standard in every single state. So when you build a new building or you're doing a major improvement, you just simplify everything. You put in one utility meter, and then you use software, you use the technology we have to balance load and make sure that consumers are protected, make sure that they're winning it as an outcome, they're getting a portion of the benefits of the DERs. But the ones that are engaging in energy management and participating in how the overall building operates with the grid, the broader grid, is rewarded in the process.
Right.
And so that's the vision that I have from a policy standpoint, is that all buildings are standardized, and that in 10 years, this just isn't even a conversation, and we're just doing what we have access to as humans to make the world a better place.
Yeah. And what's interesting there is kind of looking at what's happening in Europe. If we think about products like Pila or the balcony solar revolution now happening in not just Vermont, not just Utah, but Vermont and other states, we are going to see this sort of distributed revolution of electron ownership that for the last 100 years was one way. It was unidirectional from the utility to us as consumers. And it sounds like your proposal would allow then the building owner, yes, they would essentially be like a community energy provider for this on-site energy, but it would also allow consumer side assets and that ability for bidirectional portability of these electrons. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whether the meter is basically just tracking the consumption of a single dwelling or the whole building, the technology for balcony solar or modular batteries or small scale battery storage will exist in either model. But I think that let's take demand response for an example. Demand response is very prevalent in the single family home market and the small C&I or large C&I market. It hasn't really gone into the renter market yet. It is starting to, because the load profile is smaller. So you kind of do have to aggregate all of the dwellings together and the behavior opportunities or the modular storage or the balcony solar. And then you almost need like a last mile solution to kind of package up the outcomes of the total building influence and then, basically broker that with the broader grid and a demand response program. So I think, to avoid the utility having to micromanage these small load profiles at the meter level and create programs, which really the utilities are bad. We all know at creating, niche programs or managing a lot of different things. I think it'd be better for the private market and the building owners and the tenants to figure that out. And so the master meter would allow for that opportunity.
Equity is not just good policy, but it also is something that shows up every month on that tenant's bill. It's something, whether it's an apartment or a larger entity, that the real estate owner wants to have a good relationship long term, but they also have to have sort of what we refer to in the industry as a bankable asset. How do you ensure that a tenant experience is both equitable and bankable? Like, what does that saving structure look like at the bottom line to balance the owner's need for net operating income with a guaranteed tenant discount effectively?
Inherently, a utility bill, if you go on Reddit or you look at any consumer network, utility is like a swear word. It's a very negative experience every month. It's usually going up in terms of cost. You don't like paying it, and you don't really like the companies that provide you power.
Right.
So from day one, by recreating that in an independent way around solar, we know there's a lot of benefits in solar and there is value. But I think there is this barrier you have to get through on the consumer side where you're still producing an electric bill. You're still producing a cost. Now, is there benefits tied to that? Yes. And so that's where we've, in the different product iterations, the different billing models, how we even think about timelines of when you pay the bill, how it relates to your utility bill, that you would get otherwise. We've done a lot of testing in terms of trying to make the tenant experience better so that we can really position the hero aspect of solar on that utility bill. And so I think we've done a good job. I think we still have work to do there, but it kind of requires the tenant to actually pay attention. And sometimes they're just, they're clicking through and they're just, to them, it's almost no different than what they had before. But when they truly say, my bill is high, or I want to understand, we have all the modules, the insights, and I think our design is correct to really position the program as a benefit and a hero. And so the way the savings work, to answer the tail end of your question, our platform basically verifies the savings on a utility bill and makes sure that if we're on overlapping utility bill time periods or matching utility bill time periods, that we're passing through that proportional percentage of savings. So the simple agreement for the tenant is I'm getting 5 or 10% of the value recognized as a pass-through in my total electric cost. And as the CFO or the asset manager of a real estate company, you're basically similar to how you'd underwrite a C&I or resi solar system. You're looking at the avoided cost of power that's going to be created. And then IV is basically going to manage the 90% or the 95% of that value back to your P&L through kind of the billing transaction process. So that's how it works. We do have, volumetric. We have other billing models as well that have similar kind of pricing methodologies. But that's kind of the core framework, is to verify savings and pass through a portion to each stakeholder.
Thank you for explaining that. I want to move into a little bit more expansion of business model. In the early days, you, as you mentioned, rely a lot on developers, EPCs. You were yourself an installer. Oftentimes, you were kept in the background. You've signed 20 of the top 100 institutional real estate companies directly. What shifted in the approach on how you thought about origination and scaling this business?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we initially had the idea, let's do everything, right? Full vertical, like let's build the next Sunrun or Vivint of multifamily. That was the initial idea, and quickly pivoted because there was enough complexity just at the last mile and to focus on that.
Yeah.
And so we've developed great partnerships. Some of the solar installers that really understand multifamily from a construction aspect, we really try to make this model a win for them and partner with them. And what we're seeing now is, now that we really did, if you look at the early deals we did, it was small buildings, strip malls, commercial strip malls, 40-unit buildings, 4-unit buildings, and then pivoted to the institutional segment of the market where you could own 50,000 apartment buildings, and we're helping you deploy and transact for solar and energy on 60% of that over the next 5 to 10 years. And so we're naturally, because we are the operating system, all of that data, that behavior data, accounting data, engagement data from the tenant, how many people are engaging with the system, how many people are even signing up, why are they not signing up? We're kind of developing this data framework that is now being able to be used in the planning process.
Yeah.
So maybe you started with one project or 7, which now we're seeing more companies start with multiple instead of one, which is great. But how does Ivy play a role in helping you say, these are the next assets we're going to go build, and how do we help you create a really efficient fulfillment structure? So we are starting to help our customers pick the right partners, whether that's managing an RFP process, using our data to influence decision-making and kind of value engineering, maybe how a financer could come in and kind of play a role if they're capital constrained in the current kind of physical year. And so, we didn't really do any of that early on, but the landscape has changed because in order to survive a solar business model, or in order for a solar business model to exist post OB3, we've got to bring costs down. And so I think there's a really unique opportunity for repeatable pipelines at scale. We're talking hundreds of megawatts a year with a handful of customers. And that I can't really point to any solar vertical that's had that, other than like a Walmart or Prologis or like large landlord that didn't really have a tenant, split incentive problem. And so this is really exciting. And I think it's a big opportunity for the right installers that can deliver high quality installations, really reduce their soft cost related to sales and marketing, and get super efficient at deploying at scale across our customer base.
Yeah.
And we're not going to pick winners. We can't be exclusive with anybody, but I think the writing's on the wall here that our customers need those partners. They need that fulfillment network. Right. And we want to help bring that network to the market, to the right partners that can deploy assets.
Yeah, I mean, it really recasts the role of the installer completely in the model. And you just mentioned fulfillment. I know that I've heard you refer to installers, EPCs as fulfillment engines. I'm curious, what does the ideal fulfillment partner look like to you? How can small regional players best position themselves to win in this kind of environment?
So I think a lot of solar is sold, and what we're starting to see within our customer network is solar is purchased because the customer has a specific goal from a financial standpoint. Now they're looking to purchase solar. And so I think a lot of the cost savings in the project can be obtained just right there.
Yeah.
And so the right partners that I think are going to be building the hundreds of megawatts of assets in our network across the country, hopefully all 50 states here soon, and all new buildings being built forever. We see 300, 400,000 apartment units built every year. That alone is an opportunity for an installer.
Right.
Working with the architect, getting kind of the design right, making sure that mechanical and solar are playing a role together in the design phase of a building.
Yeah.
So one, I think it's understanding the design efficiency of a multifamily building and how solar can be worked into that design. The next is being able to manage fulfillment resources, electricians, installers, and really not invest a lot into the front end of the process, but really focus on how do I get, 2 months, how do I have my schedule 2 months out and be busy with 2 customers? And maybe I'm only winning 50% of their work, but that 50% could be, 10, 15, $20 million in EPC cost. But if I can run a really efficient business, I'll be 2-3 months booked at all times.
Because and you're going to have And you're going to have 2 to 3 million bottom line dropping down every year as the owner.
Absolutely. And that owner really doesn't want to work with 10 different parties. If they can focus on one installer who knows the AHJ, they know the fire code requirements, they know who's going to show up and do the inspection, then you build a relationship with the operator at the real estate company, and they're going to pick your bid every time because one, you're efficient and you've done good work, and you're going to earn their trust, and you're going to have 5 years of work, hopefully, in that market. And so, I think there's this dream about a solar business to scale nationally and do everything. But honestly, owning a couple AHJs and having a repeatable pipeline is a great business model. And I think...
Yes, it is.
I'm not saying the national approach isn't going to work here or the full state, but I think that the message that I would provide is become an expert in your market and earn the trust of a handful of customers and earn their business for the next 3 or 4 years. And be okay if you only get 50% of the work, because if you do a good job, you're going to get a lion's share. You're going to get more work from that customer. And I think that's what we're starting to see within our customer base today.
I love that. And I could stop the interview there and be really happy. But there's one more aspect that I want to pull back on this, because I think that while you're solving a problem at the building level for the energy future that I envision and many of our peers envision, doesn't stop there. It gets, we have to pull back a level to community energy and community microgrids. You've been working on a fun project up in Oakland, Eco Block, and I'm curious what that says to you about what's possible, leveraging the business model you've built, the software, the technology stack, to expand beyond a single building.
Ultimately, what we're doing is we're creating a virtual microgrid in multifamily buildings today. You take all the consumption data, you take all the cost, the import, the export, you make sure you understand what's flowing in, what's flowing out. It's really just a microgrid. And, we chose multifamily. We have a broader vision to really evolve the way that shared communities create, use, and think about energy.
Yeah.
But how we started multifamily, there's this obvious problem, but it is starting to evolve. And so my hope is, and I'll point back to a couple kind of flagship opportunities we're working on, is that really we can aggregate within a local proximity consumers of power and the management of the DER infrastructure, whether that's a co-op, whether it's a landlord or a real estate company, whether it's whether it's a CCA or like an energy community, like not-for-profit entity. There's a lot of different operators of the value of distributed energy. Like in Europe, we see energy communities. In Oakland, we're seeing this new entity, this kind of energy co-op entity that can basically manage a bunch of individual DERs and then the shared maintenance and insurance cost of those. And so I think it's all really the same thing. It's basically creating a framework for shared power. And it looks a little bit different, in this state versus that. But I think in 10 years, if you look forward, whether it's a true microgrid, the way we maybe think about that definition today, or it's a virtualization of power resources within a kind of local proximity, we're hoping to be that accounting backbone for a lion's share of the market so that all the consumers benefit and they have that transparency they need into the benefits they're getting, the shared cost aspects, and then how you're balancing those resources with the broader grid, whoever that is, as that changes in Europe or the United States or California to Colorado.
Dover, if a real estate owner came to you today and said, I want to get started on this in 90 days, what's the playbook? What data, contracts, partners do they need to have ready to go quickly?
Yeah, so we can do that first step. Basically, list of addresses, we'll go through our database of utilities and basically find the first tranche of projects that you should focus on. That's relatively quick. Then we're basically going to help team you up with some of our partners to basically get hard EPC quotes and basically pick a partner to fulfill with. And hopefully in 12 months, you're energized and you're creating revenue and creating savings for your tenants in those communities. It really, solar takes time, but the process is relatively straightforward, and we'll hold your hand getting you there every step of the way.
Dover, when you look around you right now, and obviously you've built a whip-smart team, what do you consider to be like the critical players that you, in retrospect, look back and you're like, actually, that adding that capability to our team really catapulted us to the next level? Are there maybe a couple or three roles or moments like that that really defined the trajectory for you as a founder?
First, I want to say, we have the grittiest team I think that's ever existed, just because we have so many battle wounds, from the utilities, from the regulatory headwinds, from just the financial ups and downs of this roller coaster. And I'm so proud to work with the team we have today. Specifically, I think the regulatory muscle that we have built, it's a controversial cost within the company, because on one side, it's like, why should a startup be, investing in policy?
Right.
And I think it's a difficult debate when you're trying to reach profitability, things like that. But I think that that was a critical moment where we did make that investment, and I think it's really paid off in terms of the growth that we've seen in the market and just at the company. The next would be the kind of data-driven, like our ability to take this really unique data set we have at Ivy and tell a story to regulators around the data that we see. There's really not a data set that exists in the world, the exact same way that we have it here at Ivy. And so we've been able to use that data and translate it into stories. And I think our data science team that works on the product, works on operations, works on policy, it's been a really versatile group, very small group within the company, to basically do a lot of things with the information that we have access to.
Dover, you strike me as the kind of person who maybe doesn't have a ton of what I'd say spare time, but I'm curious how you sharpen the saw when you're not in the office or coddling your young children and being a father. How do you stay ahead of the curve, stay ahead of the game? Are you a book listener? Are you a podcast listener?
Yeah, well, one, I definitely subscribe to the SunCast pod. So
hey, win for us.
I love to soak up all the conversations here at SunCast Media.
Love it.
I do a lot of applied learning. I think that if I have a problem at work, or I have if a founder comes to me with their problem, I like to learn through doing. And, I like to spend either morning hours, sometimes really late evening hours, just learning and then applying that knowledge into a simple project. So I think continuing that generalist mindset that I've really had, ever since I was a kid, till now, in my professional career and kind of going through school, it's really just learning and applying that as quickly as possible, and trying to carve out sometimes just extra hours, not during work, to learn. And I think it is really difficult. I sometimes envy people that go get a master's in computer science or a deep science. I really wish I could have done that, but then I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And so there's trade-offs. And so one day I hope to have the time to go become an expert of a deep science and not just be a generalist and spend 4 hours from 8 p.m. to midnight learning something. Yeah. But then outside of, I guess, professional development, I love to be outside. I think that, I was lucky enough to spend a lot of my growing up years in Utah and, San Diego and seeing the coast. And I really find fulfillment with my feet, touching the dirt and feeling that energy of the earth and understanding that the earth was here before us. And it really powers me when you hit walls as a founder and you have those hard moments. So try to ground myself outside and get outside with my family, my friends, and spend time in the outdoors. That's really, I think, the strongest power that fuels me every day. So
if there are folks here who resonate with this idea that they should be a super fulfillment partner, that maybe they've now found an unlock to a new vertical or market for them, how do you like to be found? How could they best reach you personally and or Ivy?
Yeah, we're active on LinkedIn. So Ivy Energy, you can look us up. You can go to our website, ivy-energy.com. You can fill out a web form. talk to our commercial team. They'd love to talk to you. We're always looking to brainstorm, network, help companies understand what we do. We've done a lot of education. I think a lot of the time our sales team spends every day is just educating solar partners as well as customers on how this model works. So we would love to talk to you, and even myself included. Find me on LinkedIn. I love meeting entrepreneurs, love meeting solar business owners, and just talking about how we can work together.
Yeah, we'll absolutely link to both accounts on LinkedIn. And if you really can't get Dover's attention, I can. So feel free to email or text me, and I'll see if I can make that connection for you. Dover, last question here. If we sit down 5 years from now, what will have changed as a direct result of Ivy's work? What's your bold prediction here for how multifamily rooftops will look by 2030?
I want to help that 20, 30 second energy experience that everybody has with, really not understanding when you flip the light switch on, what happens, to understanding this. Understanding that, is that power coming from, my building or my rooftop, or is it coming from the grid? And I think fundamentally, if we can see that change, the world would be a better place.
Well, Dover, I concur, and I really want to appreciate and express gratitude for how you are helping us to see both how software and policy and persistence, grit as an entrepreneur come together to unlock an entire class of rooftops that have been waiting far too long. I think we both agree on that. I know our audience of developers, EPCs, and investors are going to be thinking much differently today than they were yesterday about multifamily and how to unlock this extremely valuable and opportunistic vertical. I salute you, my friend. Thank you for the grit and determination it takes to take on the status quo. And we'll be watching closely to see exactly how Ivy unlocks this for us over the coming years.
Thanks, Nico. Appreciate the good work you're doing here, and we'll keep up the good fight.